Dear students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Mr. Darcy. I teach English language. The lesson is on writing business letters. Business letters, in other words, they are referred as business transaction letters. These business transaction letters are the other forms of formal letters. Just like application, request letter, letter of an apology, and others. We study these business transaction letters separately from others because its content is different. So, in order to see, or in order to go along in understanding on how we can write business letters, let us have a leading question that will guide us through our course of discussion. This question reads as, how can you write a business letter? How can you write a business letter? In the course of trying to understand which aspects that will guide us through on how we can write a business letter, end of the day, we need to be able to know how can each of us being able to write a business letter. So at the end of this lesson, I expect you should be able to write a business letter of any kind. What are the things that we need to understand when we want to write a business letter? I'll take you through the aspects that we need to consider. These aspects are, you need to have a sender's address, a date, a receiver's address, followed by a salutation, heading, the content part, complemental clause, signature, and the name of the writer who is going to write the letter. So those are the aspects that we are going to see, the way they should be written, and so as it could qualify a certain writing to be a business letter. So aspects of business letter. So these are the aspects, as I said, that when we are to write a business letter, we have to see all these elements are contained in the letter itself. So the question here is, how can we organize this? Or how can we see this in its presentation? So in that case, assuming that you are writing the letter in this piece of paper, and we now need to know in which positions these aspects can be placed. So I'll try to show you where exactly these elements have to be seen. This being a piece of paper, I will first of all have to draw the marginal line and try to see where these elements can be placed. Let me draw these boxes first of all, and then I'll tell you what exactly these boxes stands to represent. Now, this is the outlook on how the business letter should be seen. Now, what does the first box stand to represent? Maybe let us give them numbers. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So these numbers, they have to correspond to these aspects that I have listed here. That the number 1 of the box that we see on the topmost right corner on our page, it stands to represent sender's address. The second box, number 2, stands to represent a date. The third one, number 3, it is of receiver's address. The followed number 4 is the salutation. Number 5, it is heading. Number 6, content. Number 7 is complementary clause. Number 8 is the signature part. And the last box, number 9, stands for the name of the writer. So these aspects are positioned in these areas that I have shown you being represented on this page. That is how it is organized. In other books or other scholars, they call this as a layout, the way how a business letter should be seen by its appearance. Now, let us try to see how can we write these aspects individually. For example, how can we write a sender's address? How can we write a date and the rest of these other aspects? Put in mind that in whichever way we see how they are written, their places in the organization, it has to be seen in these positions. Dear students, the first element is sender's address, as we said. How can you write sender's address? Look at that box number 1, the way it looks like. As you can see, it has been drawn in such a way that you have these vertical lines. Which one is slanted and the other one is straight? That means we talk about block. So These lines, the vertical lines, they tend to represent on how a sender's address should look like. So we can write a sender's address in two different ways. We can have one being represented in a block style, and the other one, it can be written in a slanted. So it depends on which one, or it depends on which style would you want to use. For example, if you have your address that reads if this is the address or the physical address that you use, or that you probably wish that the letter should be sent to you, then look at the first line. I have begun it at this point, so the same point where the second line has begun. And I call this block style because all the letters and all the lines, they have begun at the same position. Even if you could have the other line just after the reslam, it could as well started just under the letter D. And that we all together call it block style. But the same address can be written in a different other style, whereby the first line, for instance, being written like PO Box 13, just like the other one. But the second line, I don't have to begin it just under the letter P, but I would start it with the second letter. For example, it should read something like this. So I might write my second address being represented in this way. And you can see now, the first letter and the first letter of the first line and the first letter of the second line, that if you are to draw an imaginary line, you can see it has been slanted. And this is what and how the sender's address has to be written. The most important thing is that when we are to write this sender's address, we don't need to put our names, or we don't need to include our names in this sender's address, even though you are the one that has written the letter. So some other people think that because they are the ones that have written the letter, so they need to write their names on top. But strictly under formal letter writing, this is not allowed. That is the first aspect on the way how we can write it. Dear students, the second aspect is a date, number 2. How can you write a date? A date in letter writing, in a special business letter, can be written in two different ways. You can decide to write it in numbers, or you can decide to write it in words. So whichever way is accepted. How can we write it? Assume the letter is written on this date, on a calendar month. It is written on the 24th May 2020. This is one of the style. We are talking about writing a date in words. A person might ask himself, now you said it has to be written in words, but how comes that here it reads like these numbers? Having this TH, it is the one that indicates that this date is in words. What if, for instance, you have it been written like this? If it has to be in words, then you put the ND. So it reads 22nd. When it is of May, again, it is 2020. But if you want to write it in numbers, then the two could turn into this number You talk about 5th, and it is 2020. And or similarly, this one could be written like this. So this is what we call writing a date in numbers. I have not included those other, is a TH and or ND or ST. It depends on the number and or it depends on the day which you are writing the letter. As I said, you can opt for any of these two. That is how you can write a date. But remember, its position has to remain at the same position just below the sender's address. Aspect number 3 is receiver's address. How can you write a receiver's address? Remember, this is the address of a person who is going to receive the letter, the one whom you are writing to. So, at times, you can either be in a position to know who is this person that I'm writing this letter to, and or sometimes you might not know. You might even know the company where the letter has to be sent. So in this case, when we are to write receiver's address, we have to begin with the title of the person whom we think he or she is going to receive the letter. If at all, we don't know the name of that person. But just in case you know the person whom you are transacting to, then you can even use his or her name. We'll see it when it comes to the practical writing of business letter. How can I write the receiver's address? We make an assumption that maybe this letter, it has to be sent to one of the managers in one of the bookshops in town. The manager, because this is the person who has to receive the letter. Remember, as I told you, you can write the title of the person whom you are writing the letter, and or sometimes you can write the name of that person. It depends. If you are in first name terms with the one who has to receive the letter, it's okay. You can use his or her name. But just in case you don't know each other, but it's only for the matter of business transaction, then you can use the title. Now, just after the title, then it goes to the name of the company. So the name of the company, at this case here, it is Zunda Bookshop and stationaries. Zunda Bookshop and Stationaries. PO Box, let's say this is 1. And where is it? It is in Darasa. Now look at the way this address has been written. That all the lines has begun at the same point. When you look at the first line, that starts with letter T. It has started at this point. So the same point on the second line, the third, and the fourth. So in this case, what we want to say that all these lines, they has to begin closer to the marginal line. It is different from when we wrote sender's address. That when we wrote sender's address, we had two options. We were in a position to write it in block style and or in slanted. But under receiver's address, strictly, this one is allowed to write it in block style. No matter what, you need to write the receiver's address with a block style all the time. And of course, as you can see here, it definitely has to correspond with the number which we had on that layout. So that point of number 3, it's where this address has to be seen. Dear students, what follows is number 4. And what did we say? Number 4 is salutation. Sometimes other people prefer calling it greetings. What and how do we greet? There are a number of different greetings that we normally make when we come across or when we meet each other. But under formal letter writing, especially business letter, strictly we are asked to write and or to greet by using a phrase, dear sir, stroke madam. This is what and how we used to greet. We make it very formal, and especially if you don't know the person that you are writing. Remember, we said in that receiver's address, you can understand the title, the name of the person who has to receive, and or probably you simply use the title of that person. So in that position, when you don't know the name of that person, and so you wrote like the manager, at this point, you talk about dear sir, stroke madam, because you are not sure whether the person who is to receive the letter is a male and or a female. But at times, when you specifically write the name of the person who has to receive the letter, it is at this point when you don't have sometimes to include this word dear. You can simply begin with sir, if it's a male, and or you can talk about madam. This one has to reflect the person who is going to receive the letter. And it is accepted. That is salutation. After you have just saluted, dear students, you have this element number 5. We said that is heading. Heading, we expect to see a phrase and or a clause that try to say, why are you writing the letter in simple language? But or rather, it is a summary of the aspect number 6. You think of, what do you want? What has pressed you to write the letter? So it is the subject of discussion that has to be put there in very few words. Now remember, this is a business letter and or a business transaction letter. And at a business transaction letter, it all has to do with people buying and or selling commodities and or services. So at this point, you have to be very straight, very specific to what do you want. Are you writing a letter as you are ordering of a certain goods? Or are you writing a letter as you want to remind for some payment, which probably you sold something and you have never been paid, and therefore you want to remind the person to pay back? Are you writing the letter as you are making a reservation of a certain area where you want to use it sometimes for a meeting and or for a break? Are you writing a letter as you want to make a payment of a certain item or certain items that you have ordered? So that one will depend on what is the subject of your discussion. So for instance, maybe you ordered some goods and they were delivered to you, but very unfortunately, maybe what has been delivered is not the quality that you wanted. And which when you are to write the letter, for example, I may use Yeah, I might have my heading being written like replacing books as per order. As I said before, probably you ordered books from a certain bookshop. When it came, probably what has been delivered is not of the standard that you wanted. So you want the person to take back what he delivered or what she delivered, and instead bring the one that is of the order, or the one as per the order you made. This could be one. You can think of any other way on how you can write the heading. That depends on the need that you have. That is what and how we write heading. We'll see other headings as we come to the other the examples and the questions, the model questions. Aspect number 6 has to do with content. Now, as we said, content and heading, there are two things that what you write under heading, it has to look, or it has to have a great reflection of what you're going to write in the content part. But in fact, under content is all to do with you are going to make analysis of what is there in your heading. And or rather, you're going to give more descriptive about what you wrote under the subject. Because here, replacing books as per order, this is a subject that it is a bit more general. And when it comes to the content, you have to be specific, trying to show individual items that has been delivered and how they are supposed to look like. So it's rather you are trying to define the subject and or the heading. That is what we expect. So at that point, all what you need is, under the content part, it is a point where you are going to define, you are going to give more description of the things that you would want. And if you're making an ordering, then you have to be specific the kind of items that you'd want to receive. And if you are making payment, you have to be specific or telling how much each of those items that you received has to be paid. And or if you're making a debt reminder, you also need to show how much I owe a person by the amount and the items that you have received. And if maybe you are making a reservation of an area where you want to go and stay for some times, you have to be specific the kind of an area that you want. What services do you expect to meet? And more and all such things like. That is under the content. Dear students, when you are through with the content, this is when you'll be about to finish writing your business letter, and you go to number 7 that we call complemental clause. Under complemental clause, dear students, we need to have just a phrase that shows that you're closing your writing. And that one again, sometimes it is reflected by number 3, the receiver's address. That when the first line begins with the title of the person whom you write, when the first line begins with the title of the person who is to receive the letter, then under the complemental clause, we expect to have a phrase that reads, yours faithfully. And when you have that phrase ending with yours faithfully, then what follows, it is that of number 8, which we said is a signature. Now, normally, under signature, there are people who put the signature by coining the letters, and also others, they can simply just write their names using small letters. So it depends. For example, if you are to write the signature by using small letters. You can, for instance, say maybe the name of this person begins with the O. And so that is what and how it could be written. O, full stop, Oyaya. And that is the signature. And finally, which this name of the writer, it has to be written with capital letters. For example, that O stands for Ole, and then ends with Oyaya. So altogether, these aspects, number 7, number 8, and number 9, they are normally placed and all look as if they are one element. So if I may have to write, or if I may have to demonstrate on the way how we write the three elements all together, that should read as something like this. So it is yours faithfully, a signature, and the name of the writer. Now, don't be confused as to why probably you have these other boxes being listed and or being placed at that central part of your page. This one stands for number 7, number 8, and number 9 correspondingly. What you had under box number 7, it is the same that you're going to have at this position here. But I put them here as one among the style, which of course again, it is reflected you put them here depending on the style that you have used when you were writing sentence address. Remember I said a sentence address can be written in block and or in slanted. So once you write it in block, then the ending should be closer to the marginal line. But when you write it in slanted, then of course the ending has to be somewhere in the middle of your page. That is the way how the aspects of letter writing are organized. And as we have just seen, this is the way how we can write these aspects of business letter. Dear students, now having gone through these aspects on how we can write them, now let us have a sample letter that will try to see how we can associate what we have discussed, the way the aspects of business letter are written, and the way one of these actual letter looks like. Now here we have this sample letter that I took it from one of the person who wrote as a response to some certain customers. Now let's look at aspect number 1. What difference have you noted from the discussion that we had? And if there's no difference, now try to see how do they look like? Are they similar? In which ways? There it reads Serengeti Forest View Hotel, P.O. Box 12, Manyara, 10th May 2020. Now when you read the address by itself, of course the way it looks like, it is in block, and what follows is a date, and that is exactly the way we also have discussed when we were trying to demonstrate on how the aspects of letter writing, the way how these aspects can be written. Now, let's go to aspect number 3. That is receiver's address. In this sample letter, there's something new that has not been seen in the time when we were describing how a receiver's address should be written. Here it begins with ref stroke bk stroke 4r stroke volume 1 stroke 20. What is this? This is what we call reference number. When we are writing business letter, you need to know that this business letter, there are times when people have to respond to what it has been written before. So under these letters, there are a lot of references that they should be involved, and of which, when a person writes in response to what has been written, then it has, or he or she has, to make references in all the details that are contained in the previous letter. So when a person writes back, or when the person replies, he or she has to quote, or she has to put those references. For when another person receives, then he has to know that this letter is a follow-up of what kind of other presentation that has made previously. That is the reason and a point why we have to have that reference number. Sometimes, as I said, even the date and the year, it has to be included in the reference number. So it will depend on how a person decides to make it easy for that reference to be understood. Now, the way we read there, so he talked about referencing, and then he mentioned like BK. Maybe this BK could have a great relationship with what you're going to see under it. Then he talked about forums, followed by volume 1, and that is 20. So in this case, now we see these are expressions a person, or the codes that a person has written for him to make the other party understand what kind of a letter that he or she has to refer. Oh, this is a follow-up of a certain other letter written on a certain time. That is referencing. But other people, at times when they're writing these letters for the first time, they don't include these references. But what comes after that, it is the name, Ms. Brightness Frank. This is the person that has to receive the letter. And what comes thereafter, it is normal as we saw it when we were discussing receiver's address. Now, since the person has to receive the letter is a female, that is the reason why we had madam. You have the subject. Now you can see the subject here has not been written with sub. So which therefore you can decide to have such an abbreviation before the heading itself, and or you can just have it barely. Again, in the example, we saw that the heading was underlined, but this one has not been underlined. And therefore, you can decide either to underline and or not. Then you come to the content part. Let us read the content part altogether. With reference to the letter dated 4th May 2020. Now, as I said, business transaction letter, they most involve referencing. So it is the very first sentence here tries to show that the person is trying to make somebody remember what he did sometimes in the past. And so it reads about room reservation in Serengeti Forest View Hotel. I humbly welcome you and your friends in Serengeti Forest View Hotel. The 4 rooms you requested from 4th to 9th June will be reserved for your convenience. Only 4 million Tanzanian shillings will serve the purpose for you and your friends in all the days of your stay. The hotel has a standby generator just in case of power cut. For confirmation, you need to deposit half of the total charges with our banker at NMB, account number 012711089, Arusha branch, a week before your arrival, and send the original pay-in slip through WhatsApp number that much. Thanks. And so, you can see, that is the content part. Maybe you have yours faithfully as a complementary clause, the signature, and there has to be a name that Ole Oyai with a capital letter, as we said, that a signature has to be followed by the name. Now that is what and how we write business letter. As you can make a reflection of the two, the sample letter and the way how those aspects can be written, we find they do match. So at this point, I'm very sure that through the knowledge we had from how we can write those individual aspects, and from the way how we saw those aspects, practically the way they have been written, how it has been practically been seen on the sample letter, on the way how it is written, how a business letter is written, then I'm sure you can use the knowledge of the both for you to write a business transaction letter. Now let's have a sample question that I would want you to see and read and try to write your own business letter. Okay, let's now look at this question. The question reads, imagine that you are the sales representative of Nanda Bookshop and Stationaries. You lately noticed that there is shortage of stationaries and books in your store. Write a letter to the wholesaler ordering books and stationaries of your demand. Use fictitious names and addresses. So you could have a question like this. Now, what you're supposed to do, my dear students, is to read and try to understand what is the demand of the question. What does the question want you to do? And when you now know that what the question wants you to do, that will help you to know how are you going to develop the title. Because that is the subject of discussion. But otherwise, the remaining of those other aspects like a date, like receiver's address, like sender's address, you can just have them in a question. And if not, for example, the last expression here, or the last sentence here reads, use fictitious names and address. So actually, you have been given a freedom for you to choose and use whichever name of your choice. For you to use whichever title of your choice. I'm talking about the title of the person who is to receive the letter. So here we're talking about the address of the receiver. Again, the sender's address and all those. So dear students, I'm giving you time to reflect and see how best you can develop or you can write a business letter with the use of the expression and or the use of the information that you got from this question. Now let us look at this second sample question. The question reads, imagine that you are the manager of Mtunguja Companies Limited. Your companies had supplied several items to Chuma's retail shops. The items are 15 bags of maize, 10 tons of sugar, 20 cartons of water, 100 kilograms of rice, and other groceries amounting to 5 million Tanzanian shillings. To date, Chuma had not paid for the supplied items. Write the letter to Chuma, reminding him about the debt that he owes. This question, again, is a model question of business transaction letter. That people were in business. Now, one of a person failed to fulfill his or her party. And so the other one trying to remind with this note. So how can you write a letter of a reminder? Because this is a reminding note. But we want to see how best it can be written in form of a formal letter. So the same as we saw on the previous letter writing, that we first of all has to think about the date. So if we are to think about how we can see the best we can write this, we would use the same organization of the elements, starting from the sender's address, the date, receiver's address, followed by the salutation heading, and the rest of the other remaining elements. So your task is only to see what could be the sender's address. So if you are to read this information, what do you think could be the sender's address? Who is being directed? I read it again for you. Imagine that you are the manager of Mtunguja Companies Limited. Your companies had supplied several items to Chuma Retail's shop. And you had the rest of the other information, but when it comes to the last sentence, where it reads, write the letter to Chuma, reminding him about the debt that he owes. So the letter goes to whom? Goes to Chuma, the one who received the items. And so what could be the receiver's address? We talk about the receiver's address. The letter should be written to Chuma. So that means Chuma would be the one who is going to receive the letter. And who is writing this letter? It is Mtunguja Companies Limited. So it is the manager who has to write. So that means the sender's address should be that of Mtunguja Companies Limited. And you start with Mtunguja Companies Limited, PO Box, you write it there, and the place where it is. What comes later? It is a date. Of course, we said you have to write the date on the day when you are writing the letter. What follows? The receiver's address. And there we identified Chuma is the one who is to receive this letter. So you think about what could be the address of Chuma. Now, when you read it out, we find ourselves, we don't have the address being portrayed, or we don't have the address being written in our question. So in that case, we could think about the fictitious address. But remember, at times there are other questions which you can be given the address. In this case, we know here that since Mtunguja Companies Limited and Chuma are in business, so definitely they know each other's address. That's why it is presented in this way. But what followed is salutation. Dear sir, stroke madam. And as they used to know each other, and the letter is directed to Chuma, and so he has to write whether it's a sir or madam, depending on his or her gender. But what comes after it is the content, the heading itself, a reminding note. You remind about what? You remind about the Chuma paying the money about the items and or the groceries that he received. And finally, you come to the complementary clause, and you end up with signature and the name of the person who write the letter. Now, this is how you could go about this. And what about another question like, imagine that you are the headmaster of Misufini Second School, P.O. Box 333, Morogoro. You received stationaries from Chamwino Bookshop. The received items do not conform with your orders. Write the letter to the sales representative of Chamwino Bookshop to explain the situation. Now here again, we find this is a business transaction letter that the headmaster ordered some stationaries, and those stationaries were brought to his destination. But unfortunately, when he started looking at it, he found the order he presented does not match with what he received. So in that case, he cannot continue using those items, those stationaries. They have to be returned. So how is he going to write the letter? The items, the aspects that we saw in other previous letters, how to write business letter, they are the same. You start with the sender's address, date, receiver's address, and the remaining other elements. And the order of their occurrence, it is the same as the way we saw it in the layout of formal letter writing. But the important thing is, how can you extract the possible information that you could fit in those areas like sender's address, date, and so forth. The previous question that we saw had not contained not addresses, physical addresses. But here we see there is an address. But whose address? Is this the address of the sender, or is it an address of the receiver? So you have to be very careful to know what could be the detail of this address, to whom it has to fit in. Now, as long as we have discussed the way how aspects has to be organized, and we have again seen the way how you can extract the information as you are going through line after the other, I would want you now to see how best you can write a business transaction letter of your own. Try ask yourself, who could be the sender? When are you writing this letter? Who is going to receive the letter? What about the salutation? How could the heading be? What do you want to explain under the content? Think about how do you end your letter, starting from the complementary clause, signature, and the name of the writer itself. Dear students, that is how you can write a business transaction letter. So failure to follow and or to observe this organization, you might not be in a position to write a good business transaction letter. So as for now, I believe you can do it. Thank you very much for listening. Keep on watching Darasa Online.